Welcome back everyone, it is Eric from Rare Candy, and today I'm back with another Paldea Evolved deck profile, this time checking out the brand new Ting-Lu EX at the request of one of Rare Candy's patrons, Quinn Haywood. So just a big shout out to Quinn for all of his support over there on Patreon and putting in his request to see this deck on the channel. But Ting-Lu, even though it doesn't have that same big one-shot potential as the other, big new hyped attacker from the set, of course that being Chien-Pao, this card is still really interesting due to its ability to lock opposing abilities, which is really good against a number of different decks in the format. And before we get into the actual list itself, just a heads up guys, if you're planning on picking up any Paldea Evolved cards of your own, friends of the channel over at flipsidegaming.com are still taking pre-orders on sealed product. Use coupon code RARECANDY for 10% off, plus you'll get free shipping. And Rare Candy's patrons not only had early access to this deck list, but also have their own exclusive discount code for even bigger savings. But if Flipside is out of stock by the time you find this video, you can also use my affiliate link with TCGPlayer. They'll show you all of the next cheapest online listings, and it really does help support the channel. I'll have links to all these down below in the description. But let's check out this Ting-Lu deck list. So up first, pretty appropriately, we have 4 copies of the brand new Ting-Lu EX from Paldea Evolved. But what makes this card I think so special is going to be its ability. As long as it's your active Pokemon, your opponent's Pokemon with damage counters on them, excluding Pokemon EX, don't have any abilities. And then its attack for a whopping 3 fighting energy does 150, and you put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So you guys can pretty clearly see the synergy here. We want to spread damage to our opponent's bench with this attack and shut off their abilities. So even though we can't use this ability to turn off things like Gardevoir EX or Miraidon EX, there's still a ton of other Pokemon with powerful abilities in the format, with cards like Radiant Greninja, Comfey, Cramorant, Kirlia, Genesect V. So if we can activate this ability pretty quickly, it can be very devastating to our opponent being able to get set up. But as you would probably imagine, this energy cost is a huge pain for Ting-Lu EX, and that's where Koraidon EX is going to come into play. Koraidon has that Dino Cry ability where we can accelerate 2 fighting energy out of discard pile, but then our turn ends. So ideally on turn 1, we want to dump a bunch of fighting energy into the discard pile, use this ability to end our turn, and now our Ting-Lu is going to be up and running. But Koraidon does have an attack of its own for 2 fighting and a colorless that does 220, and then it can't attack on the next turn. Most of the time we'd rather attack with Ting-Lu, but it's nice that we do have a bit of a heavier hitting option if a situation arises where we might need it. Up next, we have 2 copies of Hlucha. Whenever we bench it from our hand, we put 1 damage counter on 2 of our opponent's bench Pokemon. Ting-Lu can only spread damage counters to 1 Pokemon at a time, so if our opponent does have multiple Pokemon in play with abilities, we do need a little bit of extra help to make sure that we can shut off all of the Pokemon that we want to, and Hlucha is just another way to help make this happen. And speaking of shutting off abilities, we also have a copy of the brand new Spirit Tomb from Paldea Evolved. This thing is going to shut off the abilities of all basic Pokemon V in play, both yours and your opponent's. This is going to be our main tech card against Mew to shut off the abilities of Genesect, but also this will shut off Lumineon V, which a number of decks still play. But we do have one more Psychic Pokemon in the deck that is going to be a copy of Radiant Alakazam. I will say Radiant Greninja also seems pretty solid in this deck as well, so if you guys just want to favor consistency, that is a card you could opt to try out here. But I really like Radiant Alakazam because it has this ability where we can move up to 2 damage counters from one of our opponent's Pokemon to another. So Alakazam just gives us a little bit more control over what abilities we want shut off at any point in the game, and also we can use this to manipulate our opponent's damage counters to sometimes cheat KOs or fix our math to be able to make sure we can still 2-shot things pretty consistently. And for our final Pokemon of the deck, we're playing 1 copy of Squawkabilly EX. It does technically give us another way at accelerating 2 energies into play on turn 1, I guess for going second. But the main reason we are playing this card, of course, is for its ability where we can only use it on the first turn of the game, but we discard our hand and draw 6 cards. So Squawkabilly not only can bail us out of a dead hand, but also can discard fighting energies for us to be able to set up our Koraidon plays. We have 4 copies of Professor's Research. This is definitely going to be our best supporter card to lean on since we're an all basic deck. And also by discarding our hand and drawing 7, we can toss away fighting energies in the process. But up next, we do have 2 copies of the brand new Iono supporter card. Each player shuffles their hand, puts it at the bottom of their deck, and then draws cards equal to their remaining prize cards. One thing we've seen is how strong Ability Lock plus Hand Disruption can be, with cards like Judge and Path to the Peak seeing play in a variety of different decks. Iono definitely helps fill that same void, especially in the late game by being able to force your opponent down to a 1 or 2 card hand size, and then ability locking them with Ting-Lu. But even though we are playing Iono, we also have 2 copies of Judge. So while I think Iono is a stronger card overall, Judge is definitely a bit of a stronger card in the early game, since it's going to put both players down to a 4 card hand size right off the bat, whereas Iono sometimes is going to refill your opponent's hand to 6. We have 2 copies of Boss's Orders in the deck just to choose what we want to attack into. I know this is a bit of a lower count of Boss's Orders compared to some decks out there, but I think a lot of the time with this deck, we're really just trying to dig through our deck to find our next energy attachment. And as you'll see in just a little bit, there are some other gusting cards to fill a similar role in the deck. And for our last supporter card, we have 1 copy of Penny, where of course we can pick up one of our basic Pokemon and all cards attached to it and put it back into our hand. Penny definitely fills a variety of different roles in this deck. Usually after turn 1 or 2 of the game, we're no longer going to need cards like Koraidon or Squawkabilly, and we can get these sort of like 2 prize liabilities off of our field. But also Penny does allow us to do some cool things with cards like Hawlucha by being able to reuse this ability, or even give us access to a second use of Radiant Alakazam in a turn as well. For our stadium in the deck, we have 3 copies of Gatejaw Bog. So whenever a player benches a Pokemon from their hand, that Pokemon takes 2 damage counters. So if we have a Ting-Lu in the active spot and our opponent does decide to bench something, it can instantly trigger Ting-Lu's ability and prevent them from using some of their abilities. We do have a lot of cards that bypass Gatejaw Bog with things like VIP Pass and Nest Ball. So if you do want to try out something like Temple of Sinnoh, Pokestop, or some of the other stadiums this deck has synergy with, I definitely think there's a world where this could potentially change in the future. We have 4 copies of Nest Ball in the deck since, of course, we are an all basic deck. But getting energy into the discard early on is so important, so we do have the 4 copies of Ultra Ball as well, where we do have to discard 2 cards from our hand, again hopefully being energy cards, and grabbing any Pokemon. And because the Ultra Ball gets the Pokemon to hand, we can actually grab Hawlucha and use its ability, whereas with Nest Ball we can't. Up next, 4 copies of Trekking Shoes, where we get to look at the top card of our deck. We can choose to keep it or discard it and draw 1. Trekking Shoes allows us an alternate way to toss away fighting energies into the discard pile, and also just helps us get set up a little bit quicker. And on a similar note, we also have 4 copies of Gutsy Pickaxe, where we get to reveal the top card of our deck. If it's a fighting energy, we attach it to one of our bench Pokemon, and if it's not, we just keep the card. So it really doesn't have a downside in a deck like this. If it's an energy, cool, we get to attach it to a Ting-Lu and get set up a little bit quicker. But if it's not an energy, no big deal, it's just a +1. From there, we have a copy of Hisuian Heavy Ball. A lot of our Pokemon in this deck are played in lower counts, and if we do prize something like our Squawkabilly EX or our Radiant Alakazam, it can actually be pretty devastating. And for our switching cards in the deck, we have 3 copies of Escape Rope. Switch card is definitely an option for a deck like this, just because it is an all basic deck. But by playing the heavier Escape Rope count, we definitely have a couple of added benefits from it. It kind of doubles up as a soft gusting option for the deck, and kind of makes up for the lower boss count. But also, since Hawlucha can only target bench Pokemon with its ability, sometimes we can use Escape Rope to force certain Pokemon in or out of the bench. That way we can target exactly what we want to. We do have a few Pokemon tools in the deck though. The first one's going to be the brand new Bravery Charm. If it's attached to a basic Pokemon, they gain plus 50 HP. So our Ting-Lu is already a pretty tanky Pokemon, but with this card attached as well, it kind of almost ensures that we're never going to be one-shot, which is really important for this deck. I don't think Ting-Lu can deal with decks that can just one-shot it because of how clunky its energy cost is and how awkward it can be to power up a fresh Ting-Lu out of nowhere. You really do have to ensure that you can tank at least 1 hit before a Ting-Lu goes down. But we also do have 1 copy of EXP Share because, like I said, Ting-Lu does have a very awkward attack cost, and we do need to make sure that whenever one of our attackers goes down, we can have another one ready to go. And EXP Share is just going to help with that a little bit by taking an energy from the Pokemon that was knocked out and moving it to the Pokemon that has the EXP Share. And then from there, we have 12 fighting energies to round out our deck list. And this is a card that I honestly wouldn't even mind a higher count of, just because Gutsy Pickaxe is a card that you can't really count on in this deck. Every now and again, it will surprise you and give you an extra attachment, but if you really want the card to work a little bit more consistently, you might have to bump these up. But if nothing else, the 12 count does feel pretty consistent when guaranteeing you the turn 1 Koraidon ability. But that's where I'm at right now with my Ting-Lu EX list. Being an all basic deck like this, I think does mean you have a little bit more flexibility over the list since it's probably not as cramped as some other decks out there. I'm definitely curious what you guys think about this list. Are there any cards that you guys would change? Do you think this Ting-Lu archetype is going to have what it takes to compete with the other decks in the format? Let me know your full thoughts down below. But of course, guys, I hope you did enjoy today's content. As always, remember to leave a like on the video if you did, or if you're feeling maybe a little extra generous and want to take that support to the next level. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or pick up some merch over at rarecandytcg.com. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.